Good morning, grade fives. I'm excited today because we get to start our third major unit out of the year today, our unit on shapes and space. Now, I think we know what shapes are. I just want to clarify when I say space, I'm not talking about like outer space where we launch rockets and do moonwalks and like not that kind of space. I'm talking about like the physical space around us. And so, um, today's lesson, I don't actually have an objective, an I can statement for today's lesson because I'm just introducing our new topic for you today. But I do want to start today's lesson by kind of tying in some history and some mathematics and some science all together through a story to start today's lesson off. So let's just imagine, you can do this along with me, but let's just imagine that we hop into a time machine and we travel back 400 years ago from today. Now, 400 years ago was the era where Europe was a hustling and bustling hub. They were learning a lot about their world, about math, about science, about literature. They were, yeah, population was increasing, and they were actually looking for new resources to exploit, and they were looking for new lands to inhabit so that they could spread out and continue to increase in population. In the 1600s, that's when explorers started hopping on boats and traveling across oceans to find North America, and that's kind of the era that this takes place in. Now, that all sounds grand. Like I would love to have been one of those initial explorers that hopped on a boat and came over and was the first person to set foot on North America. But at the same time, when I really think about it, I realized that these guys were very brave. They were brave because they didn't have maps. They certainly didn't have cell phones or GPS systems that could lead the way like we have nowadays. And so they were taking huge risks in order to do this. They would hop on a boat, they would go out to sea, and they would travel for who knows how long, like weeks or if not months, and in hopes of finding new land that was never settled before. So, of course, on land, that looked a little different. The people, in order to get their bearings, would climb up to high points. Maybe they climbed mountains or climbed up to the top of hills, and they could look all around them. And on a really clear day, you could probably see 60 or 70, maybe up to 100 kilometers off into the distance there. And you could see that all around you. And that's really the only understanding they had. And so maybe they could see off into the distance a faraway land that they've never explored before. And they would set out by foot and travel for several days to get there. And then from that point, they could maybe climb onto another really tall mountain or a hilltop and do the same thing and continue just exploring. But they really didn't have any maps to lead the way or to refer to know where they were going. That is until about 400 years ago, a really smart man decided that he wanted to map out his home country of England. Now, England is a island nation. It's completely surrounded by water, but this guy, he kind of came up with a goal, a life goal, that he wanted to create a map and measure some distances and just kind of get a rough estimate of where things were, plot them on a map, get some rough estimates for distances. And so he crafted a glass rod that was quite long, but he would take this glass rod out. I believe it was 10 meters long, and he would lay it down in the ground. And then where the glass rod ended, he would just carve a little scratch into the ground. And then he would pick up his glass rod and he would walk and set it down so that the back end was there. And then he could measure another 10 meters. Now, England's it's a pretty big island. And what he soon discovered is that picking up this glass rod and very carefully putting it down and taking measurement after measurement after measurement was taking him far too long. And he realized that there was just no way he was gonna be able to come up with accurate measurements in his lifetime. So what he did next is very, very smart. He used his understanding of shapes and space, of mathematics. And so over here on the left side, you can see that there's this concrete pillar. And what he did is from his home, he built a concrete pillar. And this is where I'm going to switch to a pen. Let's just assume that he lived right here on the map. All right, so putting a big red dot where his hometown is. And yeah, so he built that concrete pillar, and then he would walk way off into the distance. So, like over here on this picture, I see another hilltop over here. So he would hike over to this hilltop and he would put another concrete pillar on that hilltop. And maybe on this map on the right, that corresponds to right over here on the map. And so what he did initially is he took his glass rod, and he would lay it down end to end and measure the distance between these two concrete pillars here. And that's really where the measurement stopped then. He just had to know the distance between this concrete pillar and this concrete pillar. And then he laid the foundation to never have to use that glass rod measuring stick anymore. Because then what he did is he would hike over way over to another distant spot way over here, and he would build another concrete pillar. And then he used his understanding of math. And so let's pretend that that third concrete pillar that he built was way over here on top of this hilltop. And all he had to do then was take a measurement. He would set a little device, not his dog, but a little protractor type device on top of this concrete pillar. And all he had to do was measure the angle to this pillar over here and to this pillar over here. And then he could calculate he would measure that angle, and then he would hike over here to this pillar and measure the angle from here to the distance one. And he could do a quick little math calculation and figure out the distance to there. So he didn't have to stack his glass rod end to end anymore. All he had to do was run from one pillar to the other, take two measurements, and do a quick little calculation to now know the distances between all three of these pillars. And that laid the foundation then, because from that point on, then he could just run, to a new hilltop over here, and he could take two more measurements from this pillar to this pillar here. And when he took those two measurements, it would take him maybe 2 minutes to do his calculation and figure out these distances as well. And so this saved him a bunch of time. And eventually he just went around all of England putting these pillars and continued measuring angles, doing his calculations. And from there, he got actually a very, very accurate map of the distances across his country and between towns and all of that kind of thing. And so 1400 years ago was really the very first map that was ever invented. And then we borrowed his idea in the modern world. And now, of course, we have the technology to launch rockets up into space and put satellites into orbit around the Earth. And if you were to go up into outer space, you would see that our world over the last 50 years or so has worked together to place satellites at even intervals all around the Earth. They're all up there. They're all orbiting. And this is what brings us modern digital maps and GPS. So let's say you go on vacation over in, this is Florida right here. So that's your current location. You're on a nice hot vacation there. And up above you in space, there would be 3 satellites orbiting in a triangle overhead of you. And if you are asking your phone where your GPS location is, these satellites would do a very quick calculation. They would do some triangulation, very similar to what our first map maker did, and the phone would be able to give us an exact location on the surface of the Earth using coordinates. And so that just kind of ties in modern science and modern technology. But still, you can see that it's rooted in shapes. We use our understanding of triangles to figure out distances away from things. So that's my story for the day. One other thing I should mention is that these concrete pillars were built, like I said, 400 years ago, maybe up to 300 years ago. And some of them are just like right in the dead center of new towns that have been built since he did his surveying of the land. And sometimes these actually just end up like they're in the way when somebody wants to build a new house or a new building. And I actually heard of a story where these are protected monuments, and somebody bought a plot of land and wanted to build a house on top of it, and they actually just ended up having to incorporate this concrete pillar into the wall of their home. And so kind of just a funny little side story there. Anyways, guys, from this point forward, we're going to discuss your assignment for the day. So if you go into Google Classroom and open up today's assignment called Introduction to Shapes in Space, you're intro page will be the exact same as my intro page. It'll have this title here, Shapes in Space, with this cool looking object here that's kind of rotating. And then if you go to the second slide on it, it'll look like this. And what we want you to do on this slide is tell us what you already know about shapes, space, measurement, and angles. So you can use this slide to tell us what you already know. If you can't possibly fit everything you know about shapes on this slide, feel free to add as many slides as you need to record your knowledge. And you can do that just up here by clicking on this plus sign. If you click that plus sign, a new slide will appear, and then you can just continue on that new slide, sharing what you know about it. And then, of course, once you've read these instructions, feel free to delete this green box and the pictures that are attached with it to clear up some space for your own content. You may add your own text boxes and pictures from the internet to help you explain your thoughts. Now, I did just want to give you an example of kind of like what we're looking for here. So let's say in previous years, you've already studied a little bit of shapes and you know some stuff about a square. So one example of something I might write is that I know that a square is a four-sided figure where all four sides are equal in length. So that would be like an example of what we're looking for. And if you know more about shapes than that, of course, you would want to add everything that you know. And then the last slide here says, what do you want to know about shapes, space, measurement, and angles? Use this slide to tell us what you want to know about shapes. Now, for some of you, maybe that's nothing. I'm hoping that's not the case, especially not after a cool little story, and especially not after a little intro slide like this. Maybe you want to know what this little spinning cube that looks like it's turning inside out on itself. Maybe you want to know what that's all about. Maybe through the story that I was sharing with you about how maps were initially made, you had a question about something there. And maybe one of these pictures that I've included in one of the previous slides kind of gets you thinking about shapes in space. So an example of a question here would be like, are certain shapes better for designing fast cars than other shapes? Like, fast cars have a distinct look to them. Why are they designed that way, and what does their shape have to do with them being a sport car? Another example of a question you might be curious about after my little map talk here is, how big around is the Earth? So yeah, you can use this slide to spill your questions. And again, if you're really curious about this and you can't possibly fit all of your questions onto this one slide, again, feel free to add a second slide here. And yeah, once you've read these instructions, feel free to delete my content just to make room for your content. All right, guys, I'm looking forward to seeing what you come up with. We will tomorrow.